I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our third instalment of our parent formation program for 2024 with the theme Parenting for Primary. So this year we've had some different themes working with Dr. Andy Mullins, in which we began with a general Parenting for Character in-person seminar at Santa Sophia in the chapel. And in term 2, we had it on focusing on teens, parenting strategies for teens. Now, if you haven't had the privilege of attending any of these webinars or any of these parent formation evenings yet, Dr. Andy Mullins teaches a Formation for Character course at the University of Notre Dame in Sydney and runs a small university project in Carlton, Victoria. From 1996 to 2010, he was the headmaster of Redfield College in Dural, and then until 2014, he was the headmaster of Wallamaya College in Warrington. He's the author of numerous books, which I think we'll hear throughout this presentation, and his doctorate investigated the neurobiology of virtue. So we welcome him tonight. So welcome, Andy, and welcome to all of our...
Good on you, Chris. Good to be here. Good to be here. What I might do is I'm going to put up the slides straight away and we'll jump into it. There's a couple of moments during the presentation where we'll stop for feedback and comment and Q&A or whatever. Here we go. Catherine or Chris, don't hesitate to jump in if something goes wrong with the presentation in terms of vision. So here we go. I think we should start with the college prayer. You may like to follow along in your heart as we go. Almighty God, you have called each of us by name. Help us to do your holy will and never forsake us. Grant us thy holy aid so that our hearts are not frightened by any worldly struggles to do your will. May we be open to the good news of Jesus Christ, who is wisdom itself. We ask the intercession of Mary, the Queen of Heaven, and Saint Sophia to help us live out faith, hope, and love each day. We make this prayer through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Sancta Sophia, pray for us. Thank you very much for joining in with that. Today is the Feast of the Transfiguration, so it's a very special day, really, for us to have a seminar of this nature. I've put that slide up there, just some of the books that have to do with parenting that I've been involved in. Parenting for Character is the one, and now there's a large workbook that goes with that, which is on the right-hand side. Parenting for Faith came out a couple of years ago, and I'll be talking about that in October. Now, here's the plan. As we go through, I suggest that if there are points that jump out at you, write them down, jot them down, remember them, stick them on your phone in notes or whatever, so that you can come back to 3 or 4 points that caught your attention that you think may be useful in your own family. I'd suggest then that you make a couple of resolutions, maybe talk it over with somebody else who has heard the presentation, or talk it over with your better half at home. And then maybe weekly, fortnightly, regularly in the months ahead, come back to those resolutions, and it will certainly be of assistance in your family. I wanted to put that slide to start with because that's on an abseiling tower about 30 meters up on a father-son camp. And you can see how Dad is putting everything into this. He's even trying to smile, and you can see how easy the kids are doing it. There's a lesson there. You know, you're logging on at night, and it's in the middle of tea time, and there's all sorts of reasons that you could have avoided logging in tonight, but you're trying, and I hope you've got the smile on your face as well. A big man on an abseiling rope 30 feet off the ground it's a very difficult situation because the rope starts to slip, and he's very nervous, but he's putting on a brave front, and there's some allegory there about parenting. Look at the 4 great domains of character tonight. That's what we're going to do. If you attended the presentation that we had several months ago, it covered a lot of general principles about passing on a strong character or fomenting a strong character in the children in our care. But tonight I'd like to focus this presentation just on 4 great strengths that you do need to develop in your children's lives. And I've pitched this very much at primary and younger than primary ages. You'll notice that that chair has three legs only. And the point is that if you don't have all 4 domains of character, there'll be a great deficiency in your life. It's no good raising a child so that they have self-control and the capacity to set goals for themselves, etc., but they're selfish. If they're selfish, it will completely mess up their adult life. I'm going to be talking about the 4 great virtues, the 4 cardinal virtues, which are the 4 domains of character, if you like. And what's my justification for doing that? Because really, there's been a great concordance. There's been a great agreement now between what we understand as good character, which is good habits, philosophy, really an understanding of character being composed of good habits came from Aristotle some 2,500 years ago. Modern psychology and best parenting practice also comes back to virtues. You might recognize Martin Seligman in the middle photo there with the green background. Martin Seligman is probably the most famous psychologist in the world. He started positive psychology, but the book that kicked off positive psychology was called Character, Strengths and Virtues. And he was determined to put virtues front and center. He says we've got to go back to what constitutes well-being, not just ill health, ill mental health. Our faith obviously talks a lot about qualities of character, virtues, and the neuroscience also now ratifies this. So your mission as a parent, you want to be the decisive input into the life of a very impressionable child, and you're competing with a lot of other impressions. And secondly, foster good habits in this young person who is in your care so that they can run their own life, so that they can think clearly, so that they can love wisely. Don't let your job description shrink, if you like. So they're the 4 great domains of character on the right-hand side, that we can manage our desires, that we can pay attention to the things that are really important and beautiful and true, and not get distracted by screens or by whatever else is getting in the way. Secondly, habits of overcoming our fears and putting up with discomfort for a good reason. And that good reason may be because you're getting up in the middle of the night to look after a child who's sick, and it's very uncomfortable, but you do it willingly because it's an important thing to do. And then thirdly, habits of always considering our duties to others. That's the virtue of justice. Justice sometimes gets bad rap, but it's like giving back. If somebody gives us too much change, we give back small coins and we think that's being just. But certainly if we understand justice in its full dimensions, justice is not being selfish in life, in every action, taking others into account. And lastly, what some people have called prudence, we could call it sound judgment, but it's the habit of living in reality, not kidding ourselves about the facts, and being able to set goals wisely. And the reality also means a moral reality, that we have a good conscience that tells us what's right and wrong. Let's talk about self-control first. Think about this. This is a big one, isn't it? And you're probably familiar with that really clever experiment that was carried out, first of all, in the 1970s, where they get little children and they put 1 marshmallow in front of each child. And then they instruct the child, the person who's running the experiment instructs the child and says, if that marshmallow is there in 5 minutes, I'm going to give you another marshmallow. But if you eat it, you don't get an extra marshmallow. So then if you wait 5 minutes, you'll have 2 marshmallows to eat. And then they tracked those children over time, over decades, and they realized that the kids who were able to delay gratification, who had self-control, were more likely to succeed in their family lives, professionally, in their studies after they left school. It's an amazing predictor of adult success, the capacity to delay gratification. So your children need it. That little video I showed in the first parenting night that we had, there was a 1-minute video, and this gentleman, I'm not going to play it again, but he, remember the advice that he gave. He said, plant a love for the things that are important in your child's life, because we do the things that we love. So if you like, self-control is about loving the right things in our lives. And to do that, you and I, we have to fix our faces. It's just crucial. It's not just a matter of example, it's a matter of emotional example. Children will love what you love. And if we don't light up when we find something that's really important and good, if we don't show the great joy that should be associated with our Catholic faith, or with being with family and visiting our relatives or whatever, if that doesn't give us great joy, then how are the kids ever going to think that that's an important thing? So this is our emotional example is probably more important than example, in doing things. It's the example that we show that gives importance to the things that we're doing. One of the great discoveries, I suppose, too, is that there are windows of opportunity. There are sensitive windows of neural development, and we need to. So, for example, we learn emotions very early as an infant. We learn to express emotion, by the age of 3. And what does that mean? That means that the example that you give to a child, a very young child, of emotions that are well regulated is very important. And we know the damage that it does. If one parent was telling me, one mother was telling me that whenever her husband gets angry, she has these post-traumatic flashbacks practically to the anger of his father, of her father-in-law. It's amazing how we take liabilities through generations, and you have to try not to do that. It's important that you do an audit, and if you have a partner at home, that you help each other audit the temperament that you're passing on to the kids in the house, because if you don't audit your temperament, it's very easy for things to get out of control. I have a friend who's absolutely determined not to get angry again with his kids, because he realizes that now his 7-year-old daughter starts to cringe when he raises his voice, and he realizes he's already done a lot of damage with his kids. It's very important, this. Isn't that a beautiful photograph? I used to belong to an organization when I was a kid called KAA, Kingsford Astronomical Association. And I still love walking out in the backyard at night when there's no moon, particularly, and looking up at the stars. I have binoculars. I even have a telescope that I sometimes point up to the sky. It just gives me delight. And when I talk about it, I get enthusiastic. But when you talk to your kids about things that you value, it's crucial that you get enthusiastic, that your face lights up. Your face lights up when you're asking them about school. Your face lights up when you ask them about the things that they love, so that you can build a connection. Another great task you've got in order to foster self-control in children is to protect them from negative influences. Look at that quote from Aristotle. We always like best whatever comes first. And that's true in our lives, isn't it? I mean, the music you listen to, I listen to, the sports we like. I think in second class, I did an assignment in a big scrapbook for my second class teacher on the Olympics. But I think it's had a big effect on me, because I love watching the Olympics now. We always like best whatever comes first, and therefore youth should be kept strangers to all that is bad, especially to things which suggest vice and hate. Pretty serious stuff, isn't it? So you have a solemn duty to protect your kids. And what are some of the things we should keep our eye on? Keep your eye on your own example. Help each other. If you've got older siblings in the family, make sure that talk to them, help them realize, help them take responsibility for the atmosphere in the home. Second, keep an eye on patterns that you see developing in your own child's behaviour. You need to address those patterns if they're negative patterns and reinforce them if they're good patterns. Think about the example of other adults. And I've seen students sometimes come really askew in their character development because of somebody who lived down the street, somebody who lived next door. The kids they were mixing with in their social life can have an absolutely profound effect on your kids. Think about screens. Think about social media. I'll come back to that. And then there's a sort of elephant in the room that we sometimes don't notice, but our society, Pope Francis has spoken about the radical individualism of our societies and how there's a lot of selfishness around us. That's a problem. If your kids imbibe that self-centeredness, they will end up being very self-centered. Think about the memes that they're repeating. Sometimes we find that the media is more influential on the kids in our care than we ourselves seem to be. And while it's only necessarily, partly true, it's something we've got to keep our eye on, don't we? Even the Nike ad, just do it. Yes, in certain things that's true, but gee, we've got to be careful that we don't apply that to everything in our lives, don't we? Don't you love the way that your kids look like you? Look how he looks like his dad. Shall we just carelessly allow children to hear tales which may be devised by careless persons? We cannot. Anything received into the mind at a young age is likely to become indelible and unalterable, and therefore it is most important that the tales which the young hear first should be models of virtuous thought. What would Plato say about uninhibited access to the internet? What would he say? Putting televisions in a child's room and just because they can watch some television at night, when they go to bed. We've got to be careful that we don't, in the end, set kids up to fall because we allow other people into our lounge room that we have no control over, if that makes sense. So cyber education is big. Less losing it, all of us. We need to keep a better rein sometimes on our own responses, don't we? Our own words. I had a grumble once and Siri was listening. And then Siri said, now. And then I had something to say to Siri about it. And then she said to me, I respect you. And that's just my phone picking up on my language. Isn't it amazing how we've got to be a bit careful sometimes? This is St. Josemaria, who's had a big impact on me and on the schools that I've been involved in. But look what he said to parents. He said, pass on to your children your ideals, your faith, your example of clean living, as well as the many wonderful virtues that you live in the heart of your family. It's interesting. I think it's very interesting there that he picks out specifically purity of heart. You want to prepare your kids for joyful relationships, joyful, permanent, loving relationships. Without, every relationship has its challenges, but we also we don't want to jade kids' eyes about the beauty of loving relationships. And that means you need to talk to your kids about the virtue of temperance, the virtue of holy purity, because there's so much garbage out there. We know they did a study in the UK and then they replicated it in the States. 4 out of 5 16-year-olds accessing pornography regularly in the UK. Now, that's probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, that study, but it probably hasn't improved. So, you're the gatekeeper in a sense, helping your kids to develop their conscience. Conscience is a much better safeguard than simply having a filter on a computer. So, in summary, train your kids for self-control, helping them to know when to stop. It's really good to help your kids. If your kids are always say, just a moment, or they don't come for dinner when you ask them or whatever, don't react on the spot too much, but afterwards sit them down and say, listen, it's the 3rd day in a row that I've called you and you've you've stayed looking at the screen. You've got to fight this battle. It's too important in adult life. We all need to choose what we pay attention to. Think about what we look at on the net, just shopping catalogs or whatever, right? And sometimes self-control is less saying no to things, and it's also saying yes to what is good, true, and beautiful. So experiences out in nature are really helpful for young people. Not rewarding children materially for things, but rewarding them with affection and with family, good times together as a family. A good friend of mine took his family away to like one of these sort of Club Med places. And afterwards, he and his wife asked their little daughter, "What did you enjoy most?" And she said simply, "Oh, when we all held hands and jumped into the pool together." It wasn't the expensive time that she valued. It was the fact that the family was together. Let's look at fortitude. I'd like to put an emphasis on routines and jobs and timetables in the home. This is quite important because this plays into your hands. Anything that enables kids to do things repeatedly, repeated jobs, repeated timetables and routines, these things build pathways that afterwards lead to ease of replication in the future. Frequent guided critical practice is important. Working with kids. So look at that little diagram I've put there with ages 4 to 5, 6 to 7, 8 to 9. Parenting for Character goes into this in some length, but what are the appropriate jobs for the ages of your kids? Every child is different. There's no set list, but do you keep turning the dial up? Children rise to our expectations. So it's very important that we don't, first of all, that we ask a lot of kids, but with a lot of affection. And then we keep raising the bar. And then be consistent. Don't, follow up is always difficult. You give kids jobs to do, then it's really important to follow it up, that those jobs are done. And don't lose your temper, but hold kids to account. I think I told this story before, but it's a cracker. We used to run a function for the year 2 parents at the schools that I was at. And it was always about, what do you ask of your children? Was the sort of, we would do a survey before the night. And then we'd table all of that information. It was quite interesting that there's no correct answer, but some parents would ask a lot of their little kids, and other parents would not ask very much of their kids. But in general, there was a high level of expectation, which was very healthy. And then one mum just said, "Look, in my home, mum doesn't do anything anyone else can do. And if no one else can do it, then you teach them." That was pretty solid. But then another mum pipes up, and this was just gold. She said, "If he's old enough to walk, he's old enough to vacuum." So what do you do? How do you delegate your jobs at home? It's not just a matter of making life easy, obviously. It's also teaching kids to do what they can do in life, and that they are a responsible member of the family. Impatience is big. I don't know. I've got so many friends, men friends, who they tell me their biggest problem is impatience. Got to fight this, because it'll ooze into the lives of the kids afterwards. They'll pick it up. Impatient parents have impatient kids. So it's a dilemma, and we have to see what we can do to always give better emotional example. I've done a bit of work in neurobiology, and there are various triggers for learning. Learning is simply establishing new pathways in the brain, in a sense, right? And we know that affection is a trigger for learning. Too much stress is an inhibitor of learning. A little bit of tension is good, but too much stress completely paralyzes. Novelty is another trigger. Positive emotional example is another trigger. We need to teach children to put others first, clearly. But how do we do that? With affection, encouragement, sitting with them, teaching them to share, and promote buy-in. Working with kids so that they can face their fears. I remember taking some kids abseiling And one little guy he was out on the rope and he was leaning out backwards over the place that he was going to abseil down. And one of the kids very unkindly said, "Look at his knees, look how he's shaking." And this young guy just had such a quick response. He said, "It's only my knees." And then he started the abseil and he did it very well. That sort of self-dominion, to be able to recognize the fears that we have, but then master them, that's just solid gold, isn't it? Like the father in the first slide. I asked another dad once on a father-son camp, again after the abseiling been held, and I wasn't there. I said, how'd you find the abseiling?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't go." And then his boy pipes up, "Dad always has an excuse." Interesting problem. Spot patterns. Spot patterns because patterns are self-reinforcing. If you see that there's a positive behavior, reinforce it. But if you see that there's a negative behavior, if you see there's a fearfulness that's unreasonable, if you see that there's a fussiness that's unreasonable, if you see that children are developing lazy habits and they don't do things that make them uncomfortable, it's really important to sit down with the child, help them see the problem, and then that they have buy-in. They set themselves a goal to improve in that. And last but not least, did you look at some of the beautiful high jumping? Nicole O. Do you notice how she lost, but she was so joyful? And she's always like that. I mean, I've seen her jumping in other competitions as well. It's so impressive. And she writes down in her diary after every jump the things that she can improve. She wants to build her character, not just be the world's best high jumper. Super impressive. This is a tough quote. This comes from an encyclical that before the Second World War was read from every German pulpit. It was secreted into Germany, and then the priests read it from every pulpit. And of course, there was an enormous backlash from the Nazis because children of Catholic families were being put into the Nazi youth, and they were being told that don't believe all of this God nonsense. So straight away, the Pope said, well, we've got to do something about this. So he has this read out to the parents. From the bond of responsibility established by God, no earthly power can loose you. No one can answer to you for the eternal judge when he asks you the question, where are those I have given you? May every one of you be able to answer them, to answer, of them you have given me, I have not lost anyone. It's a tough one, eh? It's a tough one, but obviously it means our example's crucial. So training kids for fortitude means helping them overcome their fear of difficulties, being really optimistic, teaching them optimism in front of every difficulty, embracing routines and timetables, even if you're not a routine and timetable person. Having a healthy hardiness. You know, we'll walk to the shops today. We won't catch the car. We won't go by car. Or duty before play. Okay, we're going to stop now for a few minutes and just look at these two questions as a springboard. What are the biggest challenges to build self-control? And what are your biggest obstacles to giving great emotional example? So we're focused on building self-control in a child and giving emotional example. I'm going to click off now and I'm going to go back to the screen and open it up for a few comments from the floor. And you don't need to stick to those questions. You don't need to stick to those questions. Anything that you'd like to comment on, you're most welcome.
I might, if you can just read out those questions again, just I can type it into the...
Certainly. So the first one is, what are the great challenges for self-control? And how can you give the best emotional example? What are the biggest obstacles to giving great emotional example? So challenges to building self-control and obstacles to giving the best emotional example. And I could probably click that up here, I think. maybe. Yeah. Is that visible on the screen, Catherine?
Yep, it's visible.
Or any copy. You've got time if you want to jump up and go and get a glass of water or put the kettle on, but we will start the second part of this presentation in about 3 or 4 minutes. It's a funny story. While have questions come in, Chris, or will I just keep going chattering?
No questions yet. Sorry, I was just writing the second question. What was the second question?
The second question was, what are the biggest obstacles to giving great emotional example?
All right, so the questions are there. We'd encourage you, if you have a moment, to think or to give any comment or any suggestion to those questions. And that would be a great way to get the dialogue happening, the participation.
Funny, this thing of emotional example is crazy, right? I don't know if I told this story before, but it comes to mind straight away. A very a fairly irascible friend of mine. He realized he was getting very impatient with his daughter, and he decided that he was going to have to go into the laundry, compose himself before he came out to talk to his daughter again, because he realized, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to get angry. So he goes into the laundry, washes his face, and he takes his time, looks in the mirror, thinks he's good. Finally, he comes out and his daughter's there and his wife's there. And the little girl straight away jumps behind mum and says, Daddy's got the face. We think we've fixed our faces, but sometimes we haven't done it. It's an interesting problem. I told you the silly one before, I think too, of the little kid who drew a face of mummy, which was a big smiley face. And then Daddy, who's on the spot, he says, oh, draw me. And then the little girl draws a big circle with 2 dots and a big frown. And Dad was a bit mortified by that, because that was how his daughter summed him up. Totally.
We have a question that's come in. So, a challenge for me and many parents is practicing patience. There are many demands to balance. What strategies can you recommend to navigate this?
It's a beautiful one. Yeah. First of all, teamwork can help. Getting feedback is really important. So try to, if you've got other adults at home, try to be on the same page and get feedback. Sometimes we don't even realize we're coming across as so impatient or as severe. And it's, temperament plays a part here. So there's a real danger too that sometimes we don't realize that we're not very welcoming, or whatever the right word is. Now, I'm not saying that that's an impatience problem, but so baby steps is always the important thing, I think. So step by step, realize, what are the moments when I'm getting impatient? Is it because I'm tired? Is it around peak hour in the evening? Is it when I'm waiting for kids in the car and they're just not coming? Or am I impatient in another way? When school reports come, I'm impatient that my child gets better results or something. And so it's always a tense, I remember one student telling me the worst times of his life were when the school reports came home. That shouldn't be the case. We've first of all got to home in specifically on what are the issues and what's causing this. And then I suppose do some soul searching and come up with some other strategies. Instead of getting impatient, what can I do? If I need to, I'll go outside so I don't show a very impatient face. But maybe it's also engaging a child in conversation so that I don't show my impatience or whatever. There's lots of strategies. I reckon Google would have a lot of ideas there too.
We have another question that's just come through. A big challenge is navigating the generational gap. What will be the best way to address this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And particularly, even with younger kids, we're talking about primary kids now, right? But even with primary kids, it's clear that you watch a 10-year-old playing computer games and you think, whoa, how does that guy do that? It's just, it's mind-boggling. So there is a gap there for sure. Sometimes it can help to have a long list of things that you're trying in order to successfully find things that you and your daughter or you and your son enjoy doing together. It's no good trying to get your kids to do things you like. It's no good trying to get into the world of your kids and do things that they like if you don't like them. But the trick is to find things you both like, because if you can do things you both like, there'll be a lot of enthusiasm and zing in the activity. Simple as going out kicking a footy, is something that works, or daddy-daughter dates in a really favorite cafe or something like that. There's ways to do this, but again, it's a matter of having lots of different strategies, not just one or two. They say when you're doing employment interviews, you pose a scenario to the person who's doing the interview, and you say, how would you solve that? And you want them to come up with a whole series of solutions, not just with one. And it's a bit the same in this, that come up with lots of different possibilities and try them one by one. Do different things with your kids, go different places, find ways to break down the barriers. But you can't live and let live. That's catastrophe. By the time the kids get to secondary, you won't have much relationship at all, and that's a tragedy. Okay, what if we jump into part 2?
Sounds good.
Good to go? Okay, back to our slides. Now, let's see.
And we did get one more question that came in just as you clicked on the slide.
Go for it, please. Absolutely.
What makes you think all this needs to be explicitly taught? Kids do well if they can.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of evidence that guided practice and proactive, authoritative parenting is much more effective than laissez-faire parenting. There's a lot of stuff on the net about that. There's a lot of evidence. A lot of studies have gone in to show that if you're intentional about your parenting, you're going to get much, much better results. And it's not just specific parenting either. It's also, for example, that the values that you bring into the home are very intentional. So, or the behaviors that you avoid in home are also very intentional. So, for example, there's a lot of studies now that show that if there's discord at home, if there's active arguments at home with any frequency, this is very damaging for the psyche of young people. They know, for example, that there's a lot of studies now that show that when there's active faith practice in the home, that the kids not only end up practicing their faith, or more likely to, but also they're morally stronger. It's very interesting. So yes, to be as intentional as possible, I think, can help a lot. Okay, here we go. Now, I'd like to focus on justice and then on prudence or sound judgment. We're going to move fairly quickly. There aren't quite as many slides in this second half. But let's frame justice actually in terms of love, because this is the ultimate goal of every parent, to raise their children so that they can love well, that they can choose what they love instead of just loving on impulse of desire, that we can direct our love with intention. Man cannot live without love. He remains a being incomprehensible. His life is senseless if love is not revealed, and so on. It's a beautiful quote. I'll make these slides available for Chris. There's another sort of key axiom here, is that happiness is relational. Sure, It's good to eat an ice cream, and it's good to eat an ice cream with your kids. Absolutely, it is. But in our heart of hearts, we know that the things that bring us most peace of heart are when we're good with people, and we can avoid that. We can go into a room and work with books. We can live on our own. But if we live on our own, we need to somehow find ways to compensate. Um, Happiness is relational, and that means that I need to raise this young person in my care so that they're oriented towards others. This book is a beauty by Thomas Lacona, who's one of the real geniuses of upbringing in our current times. He's an American psychologist. I really recommend this book. It's full of very practical examples, how to raise kind kids. And it sounds a bit woolly, doesn't it? But it's not woolly. This is core business, to raise young people so that they're oriented towards others, so that they're deeply oriented in every sort of pore of their being, whatever it is. I think I told this story before, but in the end, the thing that will get through to your kids far more than reasons is affection. And I told a story in the first night that we had about the mum who tried reasons on her little boy who was being a little bit difficult, and they didn't cut it. But when she said, "Who's going to give you hugs?" he melted. And I heard exactly the same scenario played out to me by a man a week ago who told me he was actually having a ding-dong argument with his boy, a 17-year-old boy who was bigger than him. And in the end, that was getting nasty almost. And in the end, he just gave this young man a big hug and held him. And he said, initially he resisted, and then he just melted. And since then, we've been good as gold. Very interesting. Affection, affection, affection. We have to find ways to speak a language of affection with every single child. Again, on this theme of being oriented towards others, where you see selfishness, don't accept it. And it doesn't mean get angry, but it means that you need to have a deep heart-to-heart conversation about how damaging this can be if you end up not sharing anything with your brothers and sisters or whatever it is, right? We need to keep coming back to this. A culture of total respect. First of all, around the dinner table. First of all, around the dinner table, in the back of the car, wherever. It's a big thing. Look at the poise of that beautiful lady. They're putting handcuffs on her, and yet they're almost falling away, aren't they? Total respect. There's some very good Nancy Sherman, who is an authority on teaching Aristotelian virtue. She talks about guided practice as a really important way of teaching habitual behaviors. Think about this. So obviously, if you're going to have a little guy giving food to a person that he doesn't know in this sort of scenario in the picture, you're going to be in the background watching, no question. But it doesn't mean you don't ask him to do it. It's very important. And there's lots of ways we can do this. We can do this by, having the kids go to the counter and do the paying. We can have kids answer the phone. Maybe there's not too many landlines now anyway. We can have kids write letters on people's birthdays so that the kids themselves take ownership of caring for others. There's lots of ways to do this. There's a brainstorm involved really between the older members of the family. How can we get these young guys really caring for others? One of the schools I was at, in every class, we asked at every year level, we asked the teachers to be brainstorming about what social community service we could be doing in each class so that the kids were developing habits of doing things for others. There's a guy called David Isaacs who wrote a book called Character Building, which was one of the real original, beautiful books on building character in kids. And he talked about how important it is that young people experience the joy of helping others. Because if they don't experience that when they're young, when they're older, they won't do it. They won't see that this is a pathway to joy. Skills of sharing, skills of living with others. Lots of games, lots of ways of cooperating, doing things together. And that's just not true for kids, is it? I mean, David Isaacs again. I went to a beautiful course he gave about parenting in San Francisco a long time ago now. But then he tacked onto it a day course called Communication in Marriage. And one of the ideas he was emphasizing is doing things together as a couple, and how that builds a real sense of commonality, if you like. So in summary, just a few ideas for giving importance to this idea of always taking others into account. Pull your kids up if they're not kind. Talk to them gently but firmly about how we can't go through life being unkind. What goes around comes around as well. We will have no friends if we're unkind. Once people realize that we talk about them badly behind their back, we will lose our friends. Are you insisting on ways of being generous and compassionate? A very obvious one in the home is we pay attention to the person talking at the dinner table. We don't just, put earbuds in or go to our screens. That when we have visitors, we always greet the visitor who arrives at our front door. We all come out of our rooms. We don't just sit in our rooms. Gratitude is another big one. Gratitude is the starting point, really. I'll be talking about this in October, but gratitude is the starting point of having any faith. If we don't realize everything we've got has been given to us, well, why would we even think about God in our lives? And then finding joy in serving others. Let's talk about prudence. That's actually a very classical idea, that prudence is the chariot driver, and you have the other virtues of self-control and fortitude and justice, but they need good goal setting to guide them, and that's what prudence is. I love these two quotes from gentlemen that I've had a fair bit to do with over the years in terms of parenting advice. Raise young men and women who can solve their own problems in life. That was his definition. Raphael Pick is a father of 16, believe it or not. He was the father of the chaplain of Redfield. His definition for growing up was being able to solve your own problems. So you're not going to bail kids out. You're going to actually help them confront problems. That's fortitude, isn't it? Your son or daughter is grown up when he or she is capable of looking after others and wants to. Again, that's very relational, isn't it? That we're raising kids to be successful in relationships. It's important for you to be humble, not to be complacent, not to think, I've got all these ducks lined up. When kids are young, it's very easy to get primary kids looking good, isn't it? Or it's relatively easy to get primary kids looking good, but sometimes it comes a bit unraveled at secondary, doesn't it? Sometimes it becomes a bit unraveled when older, you realize that I can no longer tell this 15-year-old what to do. So we've got to be very, very humble and realize I'm going to look for advice. I'm going to stay close to my kids. I'm going to try and work as a team with my better half, if I can. And in everything relating to kids, it's important for mums and dads, even if they're not together, to be united in everything related to the kids. Youth, like pristine glass, absorbs the prints of its handlers, and sometimes it's worse than that. We don't want to do a second-class job with these beautiful children that are given to us. Sorry about the bizarre picture in front of you, but I had an F-18 pilot come in and talk to the students at Redfield at one stage because I knew him and I knew he was going to say a lot of good common sense things to the students, not just talking about his piloting. But one of the things he said, I'll never forget, he said, when we go up in the air as a squadron, there's only one rule, that if you make a mistake, when we land and debrief, that you're completely upfront about any mistakes you make. If you do not face objectively the facts, there's no room for you in this squadron. There's something true in that, isn't there? that we have to face reality. We can't kid ourselves that we're better than we are at certain things, or that I don't have a problem drinking, or that I don't have a problem with my anger. We can't kid ourselves. We can't go to someone else's house and say, "Oh, well, they're just tidy people." No, we don't want to just make excuses for ourselves. We want to actually think objectively. Can I give my child good example in everything, or as much as possible? Another big area of this is forming the conscience of a young person. That's actually Telemachus and Penelope in the Odyssey. And Penelope she's working at her loom, and what she does is she weaves during the day, and at night she unplucks it, because she's got a whole stack of guys waiting to woo her, and she's staying loyal to her husband, who has been away for 10 years. Telemachus says to his mum, "Mum, I want to go and find Dad." And Mum says, "I'm not going to lose you. No, you're not going." And then he says to his mum, "Mum, I know the difference between right and wrong. I'm old enough to go." And she lets him go. But this idea of knowing the difference between right and wrong was a measure for the ancient Greeks of whether or not you were grown up. You don't let kids discover the truth about things. You teach them so that they have a very good conscience. And obviously some of that may be discovery. What about goal setting? To the teenage, when I had the teenage session last term, I talked about a beautiful story about a young man who put 99 up on his wall in front of him, in front of his desk. And his dad went in and said, "Oh, mate, do you think it's realistic? Can you really get 99 in the HSC?" And the boy said to his dad, "Dad, I need a goal." And he ended up getting 98.6 or something, right? And nobody thought he would get more than 80. What's going on? Ownership of goals is crucial. There should be an O in there, SMART, yeah, but O, ownership. If the child does not own the goal, forget it. Taking conversation seriously, even with a small child. I used to teach primary in the first days of one of the schools that I was at. And I used to make up these silly stories about Rufus and Brutus. Rufus was the guy that always got it right, and Brutus always had to learn from his mistakes. I forgot the story the next day. I made them up on the spot. 9 years later, when one of those guys was in year 12, he came up to me in the playground. He told me the story word for word. And then he asked me, "What happened next?" Whoa, what's going on? When you're talking to a child, sometimes every word is going in. It's golden. So we have to take conversation seriously. We're forming these young people for the future. We're giving them the guidebook for life. Every word is going in at the right time. So we need to explain reasons. Look at Horace. Horace is this fantastic Roman old soldier lyric poet. He wrote some of the most beautiful poetry of the ancient world. And he simply said, "Oh, my father," you'd think he's saying my father was an old soldier. He said, "My father shaped me as a boy by words." Not with a strap, with words. He talked to his boy. And the quote from Plato is a beauty as well. And another big one, of course, is that leads us to helping kids set their own goals, not doing the thinking for them. Peter Drucker, the management guru, the best managers know how to manage themselves. We're teaching kids to manage themselves. One of the best definitions of growing up I've ever seen comes from Plutarch, who lived like 1900 years ago. Plutarch said, "It's not an abandonment of rules, but a change of ruler." So you're raising your young children now, even if they're only 9 and 10 and 11, you're raising them so that by the time they are teenagers, they know how to manage their own lives. Give them plenty of practice. So some of the things that summarize prudence: self-knowledge, finding time for reflection, helping kids set priorities, at the start of the holidays, help them make a list of the things they want to achieve. When they get their school report, ask them, "What's the goal you want to set yourself this term or this semester?" Teaching kids always to listen to others, not just to sort of zone out. focusing on right and wrong, always being sincere, being mindful of negative emotions, our own negative emotions, which get in the way of thinking clearly. Remember, self-control, fortitude, justice, or respect and responsibility, if you want to rename it that way, and sound judgment. They're the building blocks of character. They're the building blocks of good habits, and then good habits, the building blocks of virtue if we do things with love. We need to do things always with the virtue of fortitude. Remember the chair with 3 legs? We need all 4 of those. Adolf Hitler had self-control, he had fortitude, he had sound judgment most of the time until he was losing it at the end of the war, but he didn't have any degree of respect for others universally. You can't have 3 of the 4. You've got to have all 4. What a mission you have. Do you know who that family is in the picture? This is Jessica Fox and her sister Naomi and their parents. Isn't this beautiful? To see how tight they are as a family. Well, you're writing the first pages in your child's book of life. You know, the parents would not have dreamed, you know, after mum missed out on the gold medal, something like 30 years ago, after mum missed out on the gold medal in her Olympics, and so did dad miss out on the gold medal in his Olympics, they would not have dreamed that they were raising their kids afterwards, that they could be so successful and such mirrors of themselves. What a privilege to raise young people that they're, in a sense, mirrors of yourself. So you want to give them the best example that you can. Do you know who that couple is? That's St. John Paul's parents, and that's little John Paul in the picture. Mum died when he was about 8, very young. And dad, after his wife died, he didn't go to pieces. He realized, I'm raising my boy on my own and I'm going to do the best job I can. And every afternoon when Carol Wojtyla arrived home, his dad would take him for a walk and a talk, and he gave him a marvelous general education to complement what he was getting at school. And he gave the world John Paul II. It's incredible, isn't it? Well, you don't know how great your kids are going to be, but you want them to be great and you want to give the best example that you can. It's a real knocking at the door of your soul to be the best person you can be. What a privilege to be a parent. I encourage you to tune in on the 29th of October. The school will put around the details when we have the webinar on parenting for faith. So think of your take-homes. I'm going to put up a picture now with a couple more questions, but I think what we can do then is really just any comments you'd like to make, or things you don't want to forget from the presentation, or things you want to take me up on, no problem. We'll throw it open. So think of your take-homes. I'd like the questions to focus on how do we teach generosity and how do we teach sincerity, because they are the summary virtues, if you like, for justice and for sound judgment. If you raise a child with generosity, they will know how to love. If you raise a child with sincerity, they will have the virtue of prudence. Okay, exit, and we go back to our full screen. Chris, I've just taken almost an hour, so I don't want to stretch this longer than it should be, but I'm happy to stay around as long as.
Okay, thanks for that. So if anyone has a question or would like to respond to those talking points that just appeared on the slide about teaching generosity and sincerity in the family, feel free to add it to the Q&A and we can address them. There is a comment from our principal, Mr. Mark de Vries, who has affirmed this presentation, and he says that it's provided a lot of good advice for parents and grandparents, and he said that the presentations made him reflect on how through every action and reaction we do as parents and grandparents, we are role-playing and modeling behaviors to our young people. So you have the blessing and the seal of approval from our principal. But if anyone's got any comments, they would like to answer those questions, or would like to challenge any of the points that Andy's raised, please add that through now and we can bring that up.
And Mark, before we go into this, thank you very much for tuning in. Very kind of you. I think dinner is waiting, Chris. Not
Thank
for
you.
me, but I understand. Hey, please, the main thing, I remind you from the start, walk away with just a couple of very specific resolutions that you think will be useful. And then monitor them, because I promise if you're able to stick to one or two resolutions that you believe will be helpful in your family, and we've covered a lot of ground today, but if you just have one or two points of focus, it will make a beautiful difference in your family.
And I'd like to thank Andy as well, because as being a father of 4 young girls, there's plenty of advice in there for me, who at many times I do not have the patience. But yeah, so lots of strategies that I'll have to rewatch this video a couple of times, I think. I would like to remind everybody that on the 29th of October, as appeared on that slide, Andy's next session will be on parenting for faith, to give strategies for how do we pass on the faith in this particular age that we're in. And when there is situations and contexts, as has come up in terms of a generational gap, all the challenges with screen time, and Andy's going to give us some strategies for that. So we've got a couple more thank yous that have come in, which is great, and that people are looking forward to the next presentation. So I think if there's nothing else,
Thanks
I
very
just
much
also-
for joining us. Thank you very much.
I just also
So-
want to say that this presentation is recorded, and then we'll share it with the community. We'll post it up on our YouTube, and we'll share it with our community.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. And also, tomorrow I'll send out an evaluation, because as we're planning for 2025, we'd like to get all the feedback we can in order to continue this parent formation program at Santa Sophia. Okay.
Great work, Chris. Good on you. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you,
Catherine. Thank you,
Dr.
Andy.
Andy.
And thank you to everyone that's taken the time to be part of this webinar tonight. Have a good evening.
Indeed. Good on you.